want to welcome everyone to the editorial board meeting of the Times Herald Record, which is streaming live on our Facebook page and can be seen anytime by going to recordonline.com. My name is Barry Lewis. I'm the executive editor of the Times Herald Record, and with me asking questions is Times Herald Record Metro editor Mike Levinson, staff writer Chris McKenna, and our publisher Joe Vanderhoof. Today we are joined by representatives from CPV, Competitive Power Ventures, also known as CPV Valley Energy Center. Is a 650 megawatt, $900 million gas-fired power generating plant that is under construction at a site bounded by Route 6, 17M, and I-84 in the town of Wawayanda. With us is Steve Remillard, who is the Vice President of Development at CPV, Tom Rumsey, Vice President of External Affairs, and Stephen Sullivan, the Managing Director of Power Communications. And I thank you, gentlemen, for taking the time to come to us. And as you had said as we were coming in here, there's been a constant dialogue, and what you were looking to do is update us and readers on where the project stands at this point in time.
Yep. So good morning, and thank you, and those online, thank you for joining us. The intent today was to provide an update. There's been a lot of regulatory activity. There's been a lot of media coverage recently, and we think it's important, particularly at this time as the plant begins its protocols of testing and coming online, that we have a very clear line of communication, not only with this paper, but with the local community. Community members have received one direct letter already, updating them on exactly where the plant is and what's going to be occurring. There'll be a follow-up one in September when things get closer. Because activity is going to increase there, and you see and hear a lot from those that support and those that don't support, and somewhere in the middle is the truth. And so we're going to try to come and answer what questions are out there and address them, and by and large use third-party sources to address factual concerns. So it isn't a pure us or somebody that we commissioned, but sources that are have no financial interest in the project and are not interested in whether it goes forward or not, simply study it from a technology perspective and from a financial and environmental perspective. And we'll share some of their findings with you because I think they're pretty important. Where the plant sits now is we're about 85% complete construction. We anticipate beginning the testing and startup protocols in September, November timeframe, October, September, November, in that timeframe. We are planning to commission on oil, our backup fuel. As you know, the Millennium Lateral Pipeline is still working its way through the regulatory process. We're certainly willing and happy to talk about where that is and why it's where it is. It is a dual fuel plant. It was always planned on being a dual fuel plant. Within the New York City load pocket, it's a requirement that all power plants are dual fuel, which means they can run on natural gas or flip over to oil or a backup fuel. And they can do that for two reasons. Either for economic reasons, like we saw during the polar vortex, where natural gas got very expensive, and then it was cheaper to run on the backup fuel, and so they will be dispatched on their backup fuel to keep prices from going too far north, as you saw, as they did in Pennsylvania, where they don't have that capability. Or for reliability, if there's an interruption in the pipeline system, then you can still move to a backup fuel source. Virtually 100% of the power generation in and around New York City is natural gas and oil. So any interruption could be very concerning. It is not a requirement in the Lower Hudson Valley, but for reliability and for the same reasons, we added that capability to the plant. And now, because of the interruptions with the pipeline certification permitting, we will commission on oil, probably first quarter next year. Construction, like I said, is about 15% left of it, so as you get into the testing and startup, there's always things to work through, but we're shooting for first quarter next year. So let's get into where the pipeline stands. The New York Department of Energy Conservation, DEC, has a water quality certificate permit that is, that authority is given to them via the EPA. And so when a pipeline goes forward, they need all the permits from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and also the Corps of Engineers, and also the EPA, which goes down to the DEC. So they got their permits from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission pending either the issuing or waiver of the water quality certificate from the New York Department of Energy Conservation, DEC. So the way the statutory, the regulation reads is that a state agency like the DEC has a reasonable period not to exceed 12 months. They are around 20 months now when they issued their conditional denial. It wasn't a full-up denial, it was a conditional denial based on air quality concerns of downstream customers. So what FERC did was they looked at that and said, you know, you had 12 months, you took almost twice that, therefore you've waived your authority to weigh in. What that means is they waived their right to issue the water quality certificate. That doesn't mean that there's no oversight to the pipeline. In fact, when Millennium applied to FERC for their ability to construct, they said they would honor every agreement they've made with the DEC, which adds almost 45% to the cost of the project. So even though they're under no obligation to, they will continue to honor all of the agreements that they made through the permitting process. Now, it isn't like at 12 months you have to, you either get the permit or, you know, they had the opportunity to deny. I mean, I've read a lot where people are saying, you know, they felt like they were rushed and they only had 12 months. Well, they always had the option to, at that 12 months, if they didn't feel it was complete, they could deny the permit, and they didn't do that. And in the FERC's hearing, they pointed out that, you know, Congress gave that authority to the EPA, which was then delegated down. And the reason they put the 12-month limit on there was they didn't want sheer inactivity of the state to become their ability to prolong these projects, you know, for an undetermined period of time. So without this 12-month limit, you could see where they would just simply ask for a, you know, more information forever. There's no end state to that. So they always have the option to, at that 12 months, they can say, you know what, we're not comfortable with this, we're going to deny the permit, and then they have to start over. Lane would have had to start over. So that was an option that was not exercised. Even in fact, in the last few months, it was conditionally denied based on air, not even water quality certificate. So that continues. It's still in front of the, still going through the regulatory process where it's at FERC, and you know that's Millennium's permit. It's not ours, but it does certainly support our project. So we're very interested in it, and we'll continue to monitor that where it ends up. The New York DEC did appeal that decision, and that's in front of FERC now to whether or not they want to grant a rehearing of that request.
How long can you go with while waiting, while that is pending?
So the permits that we have for oil allows us to go on our oil backup for 720 hours a year. So again, I want people to understand that even though we're on a backup oil, and it does emit more than natural gas, it absolutely does, you are permitted for a specific period of hours within a 12-month period. And so it's 720 hours. It's important to understand, though, that, you know, it's rare that oil would be dispatched because it's going to be more expensive than gas. So while we could participate in the capacity market, it's unlikely we would run in the energy market. So
this can have an impact in terms of when. I mean, depending on how long this issue
it'll
is.
have an impact on the energy markets. It certainly has an impact on our revenue in terms of getting energy revenue, but we can bid into the capacity market and get capacity revenue, and that, of course, will benefit the local area, and you'll see a reduction in capacity costs. So yeah, it absolutely has an impact, and it's something that we're very.
To explain what the capacity market is.
Yeah, fair enough. So there's really two big markets. When you look at your energy bill, there's the delivery charges, which is your utility, and that's the wires and everything they do. There's taxes, assessment, and fees. That's, you know, jokingly Albany, all the cost of the RGGI and excuse me, not RGGI, but the SBC funds, the Public Service Commission costs, all the initiatives that we have going on there. And then you have the wholesale cost, or generation cost, and that's what the generators get. And that's all determined through an open competitive market run by the New York ISO. And there's really two markets: the energy, which is used on a day-to-day basis, and then the capacity, which is based on what's the maximum amount needed in New York plus a reserve of around 17%. So it's almost like a capacity market is the insurance you buy for the peak period that may hit in the summertime. Assuming that everything's not 100%, there is an additional buffer there. So when you become a capacity resource, it means that you're an available plant that can run to meet that demand if needed. But you bid in just your variable costs. You're not allowed to bid in any profit. So you bid in your labor, you bid in your fuel, and some taxes. And whoever is the lowest bidder to get to the point where the demand is met, that's how he gets selected. So if you're on oil and gas is here, you're not going to get selected for the energy market because they pick the lowest bids. It's not likely unless there's a disruption in the gas. And again, I think the polar vortex was the first time we've seen that occur from an economic standpoint. So roughly every day you use about half, in the energy markets, about half of what the peak load is. You know, and I think that's why a lot of the great initiatives that the governor has on trying to shave that peak demand with the REV initiative and energy efficiency, those are great programs. Because if you can lower those, you're in essence having to buy less insurance, which is, you know, a key component to modernizing the grid. We think the other key component to modernizing the grid is replacing some of the, 36-year-old on average generation in the state. One of the big misconceptions about this plant and about any new infrastructure in energy is that it's incremental. When we come online, and this isn't, again, just us, this was a study done by the Braddock Group based on carbon, what they were commissioned to do on carbon pricing, the potential of putting carbon into pricing, is when we come online, we're going to displace older generation. We're not coming online to meet growth. We're coming online in a displacement mode, which means we can compete and beat older generation that's running right now today. So when we do that, it's no different than if you walked into your garage and you could drive a Prius or you could drive a 1965 Buick. You're going to drive the same distance, you're going to burn fossil, but you're going to use a lot less of it if you take the Prius. And you're going to emit less, you're going to use less, it's going to be more cost effective. It's the exact same thing when this plant comes online. It's the Braddock Group on their study calculated that a plant roughly our size would reduce carbon emissions in the region by 500,000 tons a year. All you read from the opposition is that everything's incremental. It's going to go up this, it's going to go up that. They literally said that our plant alone would flood Manhattan. They've made that claim. What they don't take into account is when we run, something else that's running today won't run.
Which ones?
Well, if you look at some of the largest plants in the state, you got, and I don't know, you'd have to get into the bid stack and know exactly which ones would get booted, but if you look, some, Ravenswood, one of the largest plants in New York, was built in 1963, I think it started. You got Bowline, I mean, if we got a gold book, you could look at the generation of when it came online, and the average age is 36 years old. When we come online and you modernize the grid, this was a key component to President Obama's Clean Power Plan, was replacing older generation with natural gas. In New York in the last 15 years, you've seen coal go from roughly 20% to less than 2%, replaced almost exclusively by natural gas. And you've seen an over 44% reduction in carbon, and over 90% reduction in SOx and NOx. I mean, that's in the last 15 years. And that's not just a New York trend, that's a national trend. The last 2 years, you've seen carbon reduced from energy production in the United States reduced the last 2 years in a row. We're the only country in the world that's done that. It's because we're moving from coal to natural gas, older generation to natural gas, and renewables.
When you say older generation, you mean coal or
coal and older gas and oil units. Yeah, like Ravenwood is a gas unit. And I don't mean to pick on our friends at Ravenswood. They've been there a long time and they've done great work. But it's older generation, less efficient generation. It's based on what we in our industry call heat rate. What in a car is miles per gallon. The lower the heat rate, the less gas you need to produce electricity. It's the same as getting more miles per gallon out of your car. You can produce the same amount of electricity cleaner, more efficiently, and with less gas. And that includes gas that you have to import. So any calculation that you've got on, supposed leakage, that would decline because you're importing less. So that concept seems to be completely lost in the discussion, and I think it's a critically important one because you're seeing it as a national trend. You're seeing it certainly within New York, as we've seen the older generation, the coal, that move to a more higher efficient. You're also seeing a growth in renewables, and we've done a lot of renewable projects. We own and operate renewable projects. Mostly, we focus on wind, but also the REV and the solar projects that the state runs. Energy efficiency, they're all having a macro impact, but that really is around load growth, and that's why load growth has been flattened out by and large. But that doesn't mean you can't bring in new stuff to replace old stuff. And when you do that, it improves the market. That's where our savings comes from. We can do it cheaper, we can do it with less emissions, and we can do it more reliably. We're dual fuel.
Do you win bids based upon cost
Yes.
and efficiency, or just cost?
Efficiency is cost. So
that's
efficiency
an
really
element
is you're
of how
burning
it-
less
okay.
gas. Yeah.
Burning less.
So efficiency is you're having to buy less gas. So efficiency means that you're cheaper.
No, I was thinking about the emission side of it.
Well, on the emission side, so then you like New York's part of RGGI, so your RGGI bids would go in, your RGGI costs would go into your bid, and so it would be less than someone that had higher, sure. You have to
Okay.
get the emissions, but,
Until the pipeline comes on, though, you're basically gonna be on standby, essentially, with oil.
yeah, in all
Unless
likelihood,
something
we will,
happens.
unless something dramatic happens where people have to run on oil, we would be available for that, you know, as a reliability resource. But in all likelihood, yeah, we'll be on standby, but on standby in terms of power generation, but not on standby in terms of market impact.
Sure.
You know, because every one of those megawatts comes into the capacity market, which means you're taking out more expensive capacity resources. So you'll still see some of the economic benefit, but not the big chunk, so to speak. And that's more for the consumer benefit. That's not. I mean, we obviously will start getting some revenue, but we won't be fully functional. Once we get natural gas, it'll take about a month to flip over to the gas, and then we can go back and forth.
So what would be the purpose of that if it's for such a limited period of time, if this regulatory dispute is continuing and you don't have access yet to the natural gas?
What would be the point of starting up into the capacity market?
Just using the fuel oil for the limited time period that you have.
Because the two markets are separate. So you bid into the capacity market, you have to be able to test and run, but you can still get capacity revenue. So it opens a revenue stream up for the plant that otherwise we wouldn't get if we didn't bid it. And we would be able to do that for 12 months, and then, you know, we'll, in that time frame, certainly, we believe, get the gas pipeline.